Welcome to episode number 40 of the American Regularis Podcast, and it's been a minute. I apologize for the absence. I've been sick, I've been working, I've been coaching, and just got away from me. But I'm here. I'm ready to report the news, giving you the hottest takes on all things liberty and common sense when it comes to politics. So if you like what you're listening to, please like and subscribe. Follow me on YouTube. Follow me on whatever podcast, Spotify, iTunes. Tell your friends about me, right? Comment. Help the algorithm out. If you want to get a hold of me, you can message me at AmericanRegularisPodcast@gmail.com. I would love to hear from you. Let me know what you think of the show. Let me know what you'd like to hear. Or just, call me a name. I don't care. So, the news I have isn't breaking because I've just had so much I needed to talk about. But we have to talk about Syria. And as you know, last week, Syria fell to rebel forces. Kind of came out of, seemingly, kind of out of the woodworks. A few years back, if you remember, Assad, who was the former president, Bashar al-Assad of Syria, he was under all sorts of attacks from different rebels, mostly U.S. funded, and had Russia as an ally, and was able to hold his ground. He wasn't able to be overthrown, much like Muammar Gaddafi, Saddam Hussein, and different people of the regions in his general proximity, right? He had been able to maintain, and so for it all of a sudden, within a matter of days, for his regime to be coming down, comes as quite a shock. What won't come as quite a shock is the narrative and the backstory. At least if you listen to the people I do, or if you've been listening to me, you'll know my thoughts on the hegemonic geopolitical machinations of the U.S. empire. And this is ugly. Now, when you listen to the corporate media, even they have some reservations, which is surprising, but they try to say, oh, good, it's a new day in Syria. The dictator Bashar al-Assad has been deposed and he's had to flee to Russia, and that's true enough. But Bashar al-Assad was a tyrant. He's a dictator. He's the leader of a government. I don't have a lot of good things to say about him, but his people lived, when compared to a lot of the different areas in that region, in relative security, especially religious. The Druze, the Christians, different sects of Muslims, all were more or less able to go along and get along without too much trouble. Now, this next group coming in, we'll wait and see. But I am a Christian, but if I were a Christian in Syria or a Druze, is it Drew? A Druze? I don't know how to pluralize or singularize that religion. I really don't know all that much about it. Or an Alawite or a Shiite, I would certainly be worried. For good reason. And it's because of who took it over. And you'll never guess, U.S.-backed Sunni extremists. As always, the man who seems to be the de facto leader at this point, who's going to be taking over in Syria, is named Abu Muhammad al-Jolani. Now, he has another name as well. He also goes by Ahmed Hussein al-Shara. Maybe that's how you know him. And he's got a little bit of a checkered past. Now, for those of you who thought cancel culture was a good thing, this is a guy that should be canceled. Someone makes a joke about Indians 10 years ago, and they're like, they should never run for office in the U.S. They made a racist joke on Twitter when they were 22 years old, And it's like, we need to tar and feather these bastards and run them out of town. But the U.S. government is a little more tolerant, a little more progressive, and a little bit more forgiving when it comes to terrorists. And I'm not speaking in hyperbole here. Abu Muhammad al-Jolani is an internationally sanctioned former jihadist. He's formerly in a group called Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, and I could be mispronouncing that because I don't speak Arabic. But I do know a couple of the other groups that he ran with, and I can pronounce their names better because I've heard them a lot more. There's a reason this new name is less familiar. It's because they needed a rebrand. Formerly, Abu Muhammad al-Jolani was played in, drums for such bands as ISIS and al-Qaeda and Jabhat al-Nusra, right? Jabhat al-Nusra was basically a faction or affiliate of al-Qaeda. And Abu Muhammad al-Jolani went over to those guys after he had a falling out with Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, who was the leader of ISIS. He started with them. They're getting funded. They've all got these nice Toyota Tacomas from the U.S. government. Operation Timber Sycamore. They got NATO rounds or whatever. They're here to liberate Syria from Assad back in the day. U.S. is funding ISIS in its early beginnings. I've seen the documents talking about how they wanted a Salafist principate, and that was the goal of these radical, what they used to call them, moderate extremists. That was the goal. Now it got away from them. John Kerry said as much, and whoever else. But they funded Sunni terrorists, al-Qaeda, ISIS, men sworn to Ayman al-Zawahiri, the Butcher of New York. They funded and armed and possibly trained these guys to go take over Assad. The problem was they also turned it east in the case of ISIS and started going after Iraq as well, and that didn't sit so good. Now, at some point during that, apparently Abu Muhammad al-Jolani maybe saw some inroads. I believe it was 2016 when he decided to leave al-Qaeda, and Jabhat al-Nusra becomes Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. Now, what does that mean? It means he's going to start wearing a suit and tie, and he's going to try to get this Western rebrand to where he tries to finally fit the bill that the CIA wanted when they used to label them moderate rebels and moderate extremist rebels or whatever. That's him now. He's not a war criminal terrorist anymore. He still has a $10 million bounty on his head. Governmental departments in the U.S., they have a little trouble getting all their ducks in a row. I'm sure they'll waive the fee, just like it's an overdue library book or something. They'll waive those fees. That'll be okay. We'll get rid of that $10 million bounty on your head. Those things happen. It was probably something like parking tickets that get you a $10 million bounty on your head. It wasn't war crimes. It was war crimes. But they were in the interest of the American empire. So that is now who the current presiding government appears to be in Syria. Now, it's going to be chaotic for a long time, and I'm sure there will be resistance. But this is what some people, including guys like Ben Shapiro, are considering a good thing. Let's give Ben Shapiro a listen here as to how he views former al-Qaeda, former ISIS terrorists taking over Syria. And this is kind of, remember, like, people are like, once a Marine, always a Marine. Now, that's kind of a Marine motto. They're like, hey, man, once you're a Marine for life. But we can kind of ascribe that to certain groups, right? Like, that's not an endonym. That's something the Marines prescribe to themselves. We can prescribe to ISIS. Like, once you're an ISIS, you're kind of always an ISIS. Now, let's listen to Ben Shapiro talk on this.
That means that pretty much all of those forces are having some impact inside Syria. Now, Syria's civil war has been ongoing since 2011, and it has essentially pitted the Assad regime, which is backed by Iran and Russia, on the one hand, against Sunni Islamic militants terrorists, many associated with ISIS or al-Qaeda, and then some other sort of hodgepodge rebel groups who are Sunni in origin, some Kurds as well, who are involved in this rebellion against the Assad regime. And those were backed predominantly by Turkey.
And who else? And who else were they backed by?
Not the Kurds. The Kurds, as we'll see, are actually the rivals of Turkey, and Turkey has been using the chaos in Syria in order to launch its own incursions into the border regions of Syria in order to ethnically cleanse and move away the Kurds. Okay, so as we say, this entire state is a basket case. It's been a basket case for a long time. But because Bashar Assad's regime was held up chiefly by Iran and by Russia, because it was used as a thoroughfare by Iran to smuggle arms into Lebanon to Hezbollah, what that meant is that as Iran weakened and as Russia weakened, so too did the Assad regime. That's the real story of what's happening today and what's happened over the past few weeks. What changed, right? Because this civil war has been raging at a fairly high level for the last decade and a half. Over 300,000 people dead, over 12 million refugees. You remember, of course, the very famous pictures of toddlers watching up on the beaches of the Mediterranean who are trying to escape from Syria to get to Europe, for example. So what exactly happened that changed everything? And the answer is that Israel completely shellacked Hezbollah. Hezbollah is the Iranian-controlled proxy group in Lebanon. As we mentioned, think of the geography. Lebanon is to the north of Israel, and it is to the west of Syria. And so Iran, via Iraq, had this entire Shia crescent that it was controlling territorially that extended from Iran through Iraq, through Syria, into Lebanon. And then the kind of tip of the crescent went all the way down into the Gaza Strip. And of course, there are other Iran-connected forces in places like Yemen with the Houthis. Okay, but the predominant territorially integrous, the sort of unified area that was controlled by Shia, went from Iran all the way to the Mediterranean into Lebanon. So when Israel decided it was going to take out Hezbollah because Hezbollah had fired some 8,000 to 10,000 rockets at Israel in solidarity with Hamas over the course of the last year, when Israel completely destroyed Hezbollah, and that's really what happened here. Israel destroyed Hezbollah's capacity to make war. They destroyed their long-range weaponry. They destroyed their short-range weaponry. They destroyed their capacity to even ship things into the south of Lebanon. They didn't just do that. They were also interdicting all sorts of material that was being sent from Iran through Syria and into Lebanon. That meant that Israel's Air Force was actually doing some pretty heavy lifting inside Syria as well, bombing particular targets in order to stop the Iranians from shipping material via Syria.
Okay, so he's given a lot of information on that. He goes on to talk about how ultimately, although it's going to be scary for everyone from other religions, like I mentioned, he thinks it's a good thing because he breaks up this crescent, this Shia crescent. And Shia is a sect of Islam, most notably Iran, and like you said, the Houthis in Yemen. Syria was, but Bashar al-Assad was an Alawite, but they identify closer to Shias than Sunnis, right? But it's important, he thinks, for Israel. It's not important for America. It's the far side of the world. These wars don't apply to us, really, or they shouldn't. But he finds it, and he's a Zionist, he finds it important to break up this crescent because it would, as he said, help disrupt logistics and weaponry and stuff from Iran to Lebanon and stuff like that. Okay. I mean, apart from the fact that I have nothing to do with wanting to be over in the Middle East or propping up Israel or anything like that. But he kind of says the quiet part out loud. Like, yes, I think a lot of that is to disrupt Hezbollah, but he's like, yeah, Israel's Air Force has been doing a whole lot of heavy lifting in Syria, bombing a lot of targets. Okay. That's one way of saying indirectly, but not really, running air support for Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and al-Qaeda and all the other affiliates in there. He also doesn't say that they were backed by the U.S. and Israel, which of course they were. He just mentions Turkey, which is a NATO country, and he has no problem saying that they're trying to ethnically cleanse the Kurds. So he mentions that part, but he never mentions that the West has been backing these guys. And if you're my age, right, I was in high school when September 11th happened. First time I ever heard of al-Qaeda. First time most people ever heard of al-Qaeda. Now I know people, maybe some of you listening are so young, you're like, I wasn't even alive during that, so I don't really, it doesn't mean as much. But al-Qaeda, man, what a boogeyman. Like that, to find out about those guys, you go, we didn't even know that these terrible people existed. But now we have the internet, and we have Scott Horton, and we have a lot of good advice, a lot of good resources to learn from. And you just have to say, al-Qaeda attacking America on 9/11/2001 is one of the few times, and then the subsequent fighting in Afghanistan afterwards, is one of the few times in the history of the Mujahideen, in the history of al-Qaeda, that they haven't been allied with the U.S. and the West. Let me just give you a brief rundown on the history of the U.S., and I'm going to skip the part where we fought them in Afghanistan after the 9/11 attacks, because I'm going to take it for granted that you guys are aware of that part. Okay? So, the CIA helped fund and start al-Qaeda to fight against the Soviets in the Soviet-Afghan War. Right? What was it called? Operation Cyclone. Right? Operation Cyclone. The Tom Hanks movie covers it to some extent or whatever, which they make it look to be a great thing. If I remember right, I don't really remember that movie all that well. Okay. After that, I mean, we helped them in Bosnia. We aided al-Qaeda. We were on the same side in the Bosnian War in the early 90s. Libya in 2011, overthrowing Muammar Gaddafi. U.S. weapons in the hands of al-Qaeda. The Syrian civil war, which I don't know if that part showed Shapiro, but it starts in 2011. We started funding them. Operation Timber Sycamore, right? We helped fund and start ISIS. We helped fund al-Qaeda. We ran air support for them eventually and trained Saudi air support for al-Qaeda, for AQAP, Al-Qaeda Arabian Peninsula, in the Yemen war against the Houthis. Likewise, obviously, they're here now. And here's an article. Now, I will take this. I do not know the cradle.co. I don't know this website. But I do remember seeing on Twitter, reading, I believe, on Moon of Alabama, that there were ISIS fighters, right? And I know this is a little separate from al-Qaeda, but obviously, as we saw with al-Jolani, swearing not only Ayman al-Zawahiri, then also Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, we see there's a lot of overlap there, right? Radical Sunni terrorists. So I am grouping these a little together. But we've seen these guys in Ukraine fighting against the Russians, because yes, the Russians do have connections to the Shiites, right? The Iran and whatnot. So, according to this website, on March 8th of, I believe, 2022, 450 Hayat Tahrir al-Sham militants arrived in Ukraine to join the fight against the Russian army, right? And a lot of these guys are not necessarily from the Syria area, but like places like Chechnya or Turkmenistan and different places, maybe in the Caucasus as well. And you can find it. Get on Twitter, get on different sites. You'll see patches on the Ukrainian side, ISIS patches on the arm, right? This is who we're dealing with. And once you start to recognize this and you look at the years, I mean, there was a long stint of fighting al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. But overall, our history with al-Qaeda is more using them as a proxy and as a auxiliary of the Roman Empire, or the American Empire. This is not out of the usual. And so, yes, we realized, the U.S. government realizes al-Jolani has too much baggage. And so they say, hey, change the name, make it HTS instead of ISIS or al-Qaeda, and, you know, we'll get you shaved up. Eventually, we'll get you they do this all the time. Like I said, you can't run for office if you said something racist 20 years ago on on social media or on some recording or whatever, you're not forgiven. That is a bridge too far. But if you're willing to kill people for the American empire, we'll figure it out. Look at the Azov Brigade in Ukraine. Nazis, Banderites, right? These guys have Nazi symbolism everywhere. The Wolfsangel and swastikas and black suns or whatever else. I don't even know all the stuff. But it's in there. And they've got a lot of radical views. And then eventually they write a couple of articles and they go, no, these guys are reformed. These are the reformed Nazis. And now they're freedom fighters. Okay? And look, if you can do that with Nazis in Ukraine, you can do that with ISIS and al-Qaeda in Syria. You know, I guess you can leave it to the American public to just roll their eyes and say, oh, well, it's one Arab group after another. I don't care. That stuff's all too convoluted for me. So I'll just take it that it's good that this guy's in power now. And it's not. So I guess you shouldn't be surprised at this point. I'm not surprised that radical Sunnis finally took over Syria with the help from the U.S., and I'm not surprised when they decide to waive the bounty on this guy. And look, maybe they won't let him stay president. Maybe they'll make him, what was it Victoria Nuland said about al-Jolani Bach? She's like, I want him on the outside, right? He was a little too Nazi. So when they installed when they overthrew the government in Ukraine, they put a couple of those guys, they want them on the peripherals. We'll see if al-Jolani's like that or not. But right now it looks like he's going to be the de facto leader, at least for a little while. And so, as I'm telling you all of this, yesterday there's another shooting, another school shooting. Tragic, but in terms of statistics, the numbers were small. I think it was the shooter. And by the way, I don't know what all's confirmed on this, and I'm not going to get too into it. So far as a female, as far as I know, that shot a student and a teacher and then themselves. And I believe those are the three fatalities. Now, without getting into details on that, what I can guarantee you is Biden and every other Tom, Dick, and Harry on the left are going to come out and demand action and weapons reforms and assault weapon bans. And I don't even know what they shot. I don't know what weapon it was they used. But they're going to demand action, and they're going to demand that your ability to have weapons be curtailed severely. Assault weapon ban, magazine capacities, whatever. Right? And as they're doing that, I would just like you to remember that your tax money is funneling weapons to Azov Brigade Nazis. That your tax-paying money since 2011, maybe not in continuity, but Operation Timber Sycamore and these things, they've given more weapons of war, more rounds of ammunition, air support to guys like Abu Muhammad al-Jolani, right? And Osama bin Laden back in the 70s. And Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, that's the guy that Trump was like, he died like a dog. And we got beautiful dogs just biting him in the butt or whatever. That's that guy, right? They've given weapons beyond count, munitions beyond count to people like that. Canada just proposed banning confiscating guns and donating them to Ukraine, which is ironic because what you always hear is that these guns can't win a war for you. Joe Biden laughs at you, he calls you stupid and says, we got F-16s. You can't do anything with that. He's mentioned that multiple times. But the Canadians think that those guns are good enough to help fight the Russians. I mean, I don't think they are in this case. I think it's too little too late. But when they call for taking your right to defend yourself and your wife and your child or children or neighbors or strangers or just fellow Americans, whatever, when they call for your right to be revoked and for you not to be able to have these firearms, remember what how many weapons they're giving to these types of sons of bitches. And if that doesn't make your blood boil, and if that doesn't really show you the true color of the U.S. government on what they think about you and what they think about rights, then I don't know what to tell you. But when it comes to who gets guns, who gets weapons, who gets bullets, I'll tell you this right now. According to the American Empire, the Constitution, God-given rights, do not even come into the conversation. It is X's and O's on their geopolitical ambitions. That's the only thing they're looking at it for. How does it help me? How does it help the state? So, terrorist with a $10 million bounty on his head is more likely to be assured of his rights to weapons, besides the ones that were paid for by you, than you are. You're the one that doesn't deserve those things. All right, I'm going to try to get another one in before the new year. I hope you liked what you heard. New year one might just be easy. We might just do a year in review, do a top 10 list or something. Or, who knows, in 3 days, something else crazy comes out. But, let me remind you, like and subscribe, tell all your friends, shout it from the rooftops. American Regularis Podcast. We'll catch you on the next one.